Many say that the first and second seasons of Spartacus absolutely deserve the title of the most classic in American TV series history, and the third season has slowly descended from its pedestal. But as long as you have seen the third season, you will know that it still can beat 99.9% of current American TV series. After Spartacus killed Glaber to avenge his wife, his ambition was no longer limited to fighting for personal grievances, but to fight for the liberation of thousands and thousands of slaves who were still suffering in the world. Spartacus leads the slave army, marching towards Rome with high spirits. Slaves from all over the country rose up and joined his rebel army one after another. This made the strength of the entire slave rebellion army increasingly formidable, step by step threatening the rule of Rome. This made the two Roman generals on the front lines very uneasy. Now the soldiers tremble in fear at the mere mention of Spartacus's name. To seek support, they had the civil officer Metellus persuade Marcus Crassus to join the Roman army. Speaking of Crassus, everyone must be familiar with him. He is an important character in this season and a real historical figure. He, along with Pompey and Caesar, formed the triumvirate of the Roman Republic and was also the richest man in Rome at that time. Crassus is extremely cunning. For months, he has been practicing dueling skills with a gladiator every day. He ignored everything else, and even Crassus demanded his son Tiberius to watch all the time. Tiberius was puzzled by his father's behavior, thinking it was very shameful for his father to learn from a slave. But due to his father's authority, he could only swallow his anger. Before long, Metellus found Crassus and straightforwardly demanded that Crassus dispatch troops under very harsh conditions. Crassus had to provide an army of 10,000 men, and he was responsible for all their food, clothing, and needs, as the Senate had no extra financial resources. In return, Crassus would have command over these men, but his position in the army would be after Cassinius and Furius. Logically, such conditions would be refused by anyone, but Crassus had no intention of bargaining and agreed to dispatch troops immediately. At the same time, Crassus also said he would personally deliver the news of the dispatch to the two generals. Metellus left satisfied. Tiberius was very displeased with his father's behavior. Crassus replied that everything was for Rome, and one should not care about personal gains or losses. But is it really as he said? On the other side, Spartacus's subordinates found him and informed him that a team of Roman soldiers wanted to break into their territory. Of course, Spartacus wouldn't let them go and immediately led his men to kill them. Without saying a word, they annihilated this group of Roman soldiers. Just as they were cleaning up the battlefield, Spartacus recovered a secret letter from a Roman soldier. The content of the letter was exactly about Crassus preparing to personally lead an army of 10,000 men. Spartacus immediately called Crixus and others to discuss the matter. Everyone unanimously agreed that they could not let the two enemy armies join forces, as that would create an encirclement situation, and they would find themselves sandwiched and forced into a passive position. Thus, Spartacus decided to have Agron lead the main force to the north of the enemy for a feigned attack to draw their attention, while he and Crixus would annihilate the enemy's central camp. As expected, when the city guards were drawn away, Spartacus and his men successfully sneaked in and took the heads of Cassinius and Furius. At the same time, Crassus was still practicing swordsmanship with the gladiator Hilarus. He ordered Hilarus to use all his strength. Hilarus confessed his fear that whether he won or lost, he would die. Crassus promised in front of Tiberius that if he was defeated by Hilarus, he would grant Hilarus his freedom and would not seek revenge. The two, forgetting life and death, began to fight fiercely, and ultimately Hilarus died under the sword of Crassus.
You were waiting for me to think you made the step I warned you of.
Knowledge and patience, the only counter to greater skill.
You have been well schooled.
Know that your service will not pass unremembered.
The next day, news of the death of the two generals reached Crassus. It turned out that this was all his trap. Crassus was unwilling to be ranked behind these two generals, so he came up with this method to use Spartacus's hand to eliminate his two political enemies. This way, the command of the army would be under his sole control. Even though Metellus had roughly guessed Crassus's trick, there were no available generals at the moment, so he could only let Crassus lead the army.
Sole command and charge to bring Spartacus to deserved end is now yours, along with the title of Imperator, if you so wish it.
I serve the glory of Rome.
as do we all.
In the eyes of ordinary people, this might be a bunch of disgusting animal innards, but in the eyes of the refugees, these were foods that could stave off hunger. Seeing his rebel army living in such dire conditions, Spartacus stood speechless for a long time. He always said that he was fighting to liberate the countless slaves suffering in the world, but in the end, he brought them this kind of life where they could barely fill their stomachs. Spartacus secretly resolved to capture a city to solve the problems of food supply and shelter. At night, Spartacus called Crixus and others to discuss this matter. Everyone unanimously decided to prepare to attack a nearby city called Syrawaisha. The city was surrounded by mountains, easy to defend but difficult to attack, and the climate was quite good, which could temporarily alleviate the problem of the rebel army's homelessness. However, Diotimos, who had once lived in this city, told Spartacus that the city was heavily guarded with high walls all around, and the city's municipal officials were afraid of a slave revolt, so no one entering the city was allowed to carry weapons. So, taking it by force was as difficult as climbing to heaven. After much consideration, Spartacus decided to first send a few people to blend in and, under the cover of night, kill the guards to open the city gates for the rebel army. Just then, Gannicus mentioned that he knew a blacksmith named Attius in the city, who could be offered a high reward to forge some weapons for them. Diotimos also mentioned that his former master, Laurus, was a big shot in the city, and they could use his name to enter. After preparations were made, the next day the three Spartacus entered the city in disguise. The city was indeed very prosperous and also heavily guarded. The soldiers questioned Spartacus and his companions thoroughly, and they almost gave themselves away. Fortunately, Spartacus mentioned the name of the slave master and they managed to enter without incident. However, as soon as they entered the city, they saw a group of people in the marketplace punishing a slave. The slave master announced the slave's crimes to the crowd. Influenced by Spartacus's rebellion, the slaves in this city had also started to become restless. To make an example, the nobles decided to execute the slave by stoning. The city officer Ennius and his wife Leda were also present. Leda, a very kind person, tried to persuade her husband to spare the slave, but she was unsuccessful and left in great anger. Stoning here is very brutal. It's when a group of people take a stone and smash someone alive. Spartacus didn't want to cause any trouble but couldn't bear to see the suffering. To end the slave's pain, he threw a stone to kill the slave. This still attracted the attention of others, and they had to leave in a hurry.
Your attention. Evident suffering, as I would for also afflicted by festering disease of Rome.
They went to the blacksmith shop and found Attius. Spartacus gave him a large sum of money to forge 2 swords and come back for them by sunset. Spartacus and Gannicus stayed in the city, while Crixus left to have Agron prepare the main force. Soon it was night, and Attius finally finished forging the swords. However, due to the curfew and being strangers, Spartacus and Gannicus couldn't wander outside, so they decided to have Attius open the city gate for them. Initially, Attius refused, but Gannicus threatened him, saying that if they were caught, Attius would also face death since the weapons were his work. Under duress, Attius reluctantly agreed. By then, the rebel army outside the city had been assembled for a long time. Crixus and Agron were anxiously waiting for Spartacus's signal to attack. Opening the gate was not smooth, with soldiers patrolling everywhere. Thinking quickly, Attius lied about discovering Spartacus's whereabouts, lured a group of soldiers to the armory, and then quickly locked them in. Hearing the soldiers' shouts, Spartacus and Gannicus promptly killed their way out. They fought wildly against any soldiers they encountered. Indeed, the combat prowess of these 2 gladiators was terrifying, like war gods incarnate. Just as they were forcefully pulling the gate open, the soldiers locked inside broke through the wooden door and killed their way out. At the critical moment, Crixus and Agron slipped in through the door crack. The group lifted the city gate, and the main force flooded into the city like a tide. They swept through, slaughtering all the soldiers in a matter of minutes. The city's slaves also organized themselves and killed their masters. In a moment, the entire city became a graveyard for slave masters and nobles. Leda was caught by Spartacus while trying to escape. Upon learning that this man was Spartacus, Leda was extremely terrified. The city was filled with corpses, certainly not what Spartacus wanted to see. But thinking of the slaves who were stoned, Spartacus was unsure of the right choice. Soon, Another group of nobles was caught by the rebel army. Just as they were about to kill these nobles, Spartacus, feeling compassion, stopped them.
Please, let my wife live!
The city is taken. See the Romans that yet live to chains. Chains!
You let them live.
They pose no threat.
Nor fucking use!
Would they show mercy if we were beneath heel?
At that moment, Crixus came and reported that Aeneas had locked himself in the granary. He poured tar all over it and threatened to burn it down. Spartacus asked Leda to persuade her husband, promising in exchange that he would not allow his men to continue slaughtering the Romans in the city. Leda looked at the Romans begging for mercy and nodded helplessly. Following Spartacus's order, Leda went to the granary to persuade her husband. However, while Aeneas was distracted, Crixus and Gannicus ambushed and killed several guards. Seizing the opportunity, Spartacus thrust a spear into Aeneas's mouth. Leda was heartbroken and loudly blamed Spartacus. However, having experienced so much, Spartacus no longer believed in the word of Romans, but to avoid further killing, Spartacus ordered not to harm the surviving Romans.
We have had our fill of blood and vengeance this night. No Roman that yet draws breath shall suffer further harm. The city is ours!
The pregnant noblewoman, 8 months into her pregnancy, hadn't eaten for 3 days. Someone in the rebel army took out a loaf of bread and dangled it in front of Ulpianus and his wife, demanding they reveal where their money was hidden for the sake of his wife and child. Ulpianus told them the location of his savings.
The bread. For my wife.
However, the moment the bread hit the ground, another Roman charged at it like a wolf. They fought fiercely over the loaf of bread. Just then, Crixus approached and pulled the two men apart. He demanded the two captives fight to the death. The winner would get the bread, and the loser would face death. Attius, unable to bear the sight, quickly asked Gannicus to intercede. Ulpianus, although a Roman noble, was a very kind man. Before the rebels captured the city, Ulpianus had never harmed any slave. Gannicus wanted to stop it but was rebuffed by Naedia. When the Roman nobility forced slaves to fight to the death in the arena for their amusement, did they ever consider that slaves were also living beings? This was just an act of retribution. Amidst the cheers of the rebel army, the two Romans started a deadly knife fight. After a fierce battle, Ulpianus eventually won. However, as he reached for the bread, Naedia cut off his arm with a sword. Naedia thought Ulpianus was going to pick up a sword and attack Crixus from behind. Unable to bear it anymore, Attius loudly condemned Naedia's cruelty. Seeing Attius bully his woman, Crixus stepped forward to teach Attius a lesson, but Gannicus stopped him in time. Attius was furious. He helped Ulpianus bandage his wound, condemning the barbaric actions of the rebel army. How were they any different from those Romans? Crixus was also puzzled by Naedia's actions, but Naedia's subsequent words left Crixus speechless. Before Naedia was sent to the mines while still a slave, she was used as a tool for pleasure and given to various slave masters. They tortured Naedia's body with all sorts of tools,
before turning them to outward flesh.
I wish I had power to seize memory, and with hands strip it from life.
What I saw in morning light forever darkens thought. The man himself, greeting his wife with kiss and warm smile. His daughters laughing upon his knee. The beast from the previous night transformed into a man who held no threat.
This experience became the shadow of Naedia's life and the main reason she wanted to kill all the Romans in the world. On the other hand, since Spartacus and his slave army captured the city, he and Agron began to count the food in storage. All the food combined was only enough for 2 weeks, and the number of rebels was still increasing. At this rate, the food might be exhausted in less than 2 weeks. In their distress, for people came to the city gate with a large barrel. Spartacus let them into the city. The 4 men claimed to be pirates from nearby, bringing fine wine to Spartacus. The pirate leader Heraclio praised Spartacus for leading the slave rebellion, as they too harbored hatred towards the Romans. Seeing Spartacus unmoved, Heraclio revealed his true purpose. Before Spartacus captured the city, Heraclio had a secret deal with Aeneas. Aeneas provided Heraclio with a legal sea pass, and in return, Heraclio would rob the merchant ships passing by based on the information from Aeneas, splitting the profits 50-50. Hearing this, Spartacus became instantly interested. With the Roman army blockading the land, it was nearly impossible to bring food into the city, but sea transportation remained unobstructed, so he hurriedly arranged for Aeneas' seal to be found and prepared to continue the agreement between Aeneas and the pirates. He would give them money to help smuggle food into the city, but they searched the house and couldn't find the seal. Spartacus had no choice but to ask Aeneas' wife Leda for help. Leda was disgusted with Spartacus, and it was because she trusted him that her husband was killed. Moreover, the incident with Ulpianus made her see Spartacus as a demon. However, Spartacus was unaware of what happened to Ulpianus. He didn't want his men to kill innocents indiscriminately. Meanwhile, Spartacus's next words plunged Leda's heart into despair. She always believed her husband was an upright and brave man, but behind her back, he colluded with pirates, doing unspeakable things. Spartacus offered Leda a condition for helping find the seal. Once they left the city, all captives would be freed. Until then, Spartacus assured that the rebels would not mistreat the Romans anymore. For the sake of saving others, Leda eventually agreed to help Spartacus find the seal.
Trust your word.
The reason is simple. You stand absent choice.
In the afternoon, the pirates arrived as scheduled, and Spartacus proposed the conditions for purchasing food. Heraclio, not being a fool, saw the profit in this and agreed. Thus, both parties happily agreed to cooperate and arranged to exchange money for food outside the city after sunset. At the appointed time of the trade, since Spartacus had not yet established a uniform system of trophy management, he had to ask his men to chip in when funds ran short, although they eventually gathered enough money to buy the food. This angered a part of the group. Before leaving the city, Spartacus worried about the trustworthiness of the pirates, so he instructed Naevia that once the gates were closed behind them, they were not to be opened without his permission. After saying this, Spartacus left the city with a few strong warriors, but while they were trading, there was a report from the city that Ulpianus, who had fought in the duel this morning, had escaped with dozens of prisoners. They couldn't find any trace of them in the city. Naevia panicked, fearing they might rebel while Spartacus was away. She immediately found Attius, who had spoken for Ulpianus that morning. Without giving Attius a chance to explain, they started fighting. Naevia, having learned combat skills from Crixus, and with Attius having no intention to kill her, eventually grabbed a hammer and smashed it into Attius's head. Naevia's hatred for the Romans had blinded her, even if Attius had nothing to do with it. On the other side, Leda had hidden the dozens of captives in a cellar. Since Spartacus had broken his promise and killed her husband, she no longer believed these barbarians would treat these innocent people kindly. Meanwhile, Spartacus's trade outside wasn't going smoothly either. Unbeknownst to them, a group of fully armed Roman soldiers led by Tiberius was stationed on the mountaintop, overseeing Spartacus and the pirates' trade. But how could they have appeared there?